I'm Dr. Kim Sage. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. Welcome to my YouTube channel and to this series of videos really looking at how our childhood, especially if we were raised by more untreated, narcissistic, borderline, emotionally immature on the extreme end, or wounded type parents, how all of that can affect how we grow up and see the world and how we engage in our own lives and relationships. So really quickly also, if you're new here, please consider subscribing and checking that little bell, that little box, and that way you'll get notified when I post new videos. And if you are someone who was raised by really often called toxic parents, but just honestly parents who really struggled and suffered and often were never helped or treated, I have 3 courses. One is a free course. Please check that out. I'll link down below. And then 2 courses on healing and dealing with the trauma of borderline or narcissistic parents. And there's just a lot of lessons and information and exercises and videos, and a course called Remothering. And that's about how to heal and deal with the internalized parent and child inside your heart and life. Okay, let's get into today's video. So I've been talking in the last couple videos about how we often take on this sense of, it's like a distortion in how we think about the world and relationships when we have parents who really struggled. And I'm talking about a pattern, not parents who sometimes messed up, because we all do. Or we have seasons where we were struggling and our parenting wasn't as great. I'm talking about parents who again and again and again throughout childhood and even now oftentimes are still very hurtful, very wounding, can't see you, very conditional, very unpredictable. Those types of parents are the parents that you feel like, as I've said before, a sense of strong hate or strong love and hate for. That shouldn't be still existing in your adult life, right? We're not talking about adolescence when you're trying to separate. We're talking about real patterns. So as a result of having parents who didn't have really good abilities to attune to you and see you and hear you, and sort of oftentimes gave you the sense of like right or wrong, good or bad, as I discussed earlier this week in the splitting dynamic, which is very common, especially in narcissistic and borderline humans who struggle, we often develop this idea that everyone and everything is my responsibility. And that loops back to everything is good or bad, right or wrong, and the core, as I often said, which is I am bad. It's my fault and there is something wrong with me. And so we live in this, it's my fault, and we're often these caretakers. We've learned to rotate around and mind and mood read our parents. And so we believe that everyone else's emotions and their behavior is somehow our fault and our responsibility. I mean, just for a minute and think about that. The idea that if you are the person holding the weight of everyone around you's emotions and behaviors and feelings and thoughts, what an incredibly heavy weight that is to carry. And so what it does is it often sets us up to live with this chaos inside, but always be trying to control things because we've learned to be perfectionists. We've learned that if we can get in front of something and shame or blame ourselves and criticize ourselves and it goes better, or if we deny our needs and desires, that has a better chance of making that parent happy. And so therefore we're taking everything, right? We believe that everything belongs to us and it's our fault. And so oftentimes we not only have these kind of parents, but we've often chosen these kind of partners who subconsciously are often similar to our parents. It sets up this idea that our entire life is still very much a right or wrong, all or nothing dynamic, and that everyone's feelings and everyone's issues are always our fault. And so we walk around feeling responsible. So we're rotating around everyone else, and as a result, we often, as we get older, we've learned to feel responsible for our parents because they told us their sad stories, or we watched them suffer. We know they had childhood trauma, and that is not to take away from them. But the problem is that we feel so sorry for them and not sorry enough for ourselves. And so we end up making ourselves try harder and harder to make them happy, to justify their behavior, and to minimize our own feelings. And so we do the same thing for our partner. We tell ourselves, well, you know what, that behavior they had, like they love me, they didn't mean it, they're just really struggling, or they're just like that, they had a hard childhood too. And yes, maybe they did, but they are still responsible for their behavior just like you are, and it doesn't make it okay. And so the first thing we want to do is start to look at, well, where do I do this? And How do I respond? What are my feelings about situations? What are my feelings and what are someone else's feelings? And where am I getting stuck and muddying the waters? Like there's no good healthy boundary between my parents' emotions and feelings, or my partner's emotions and feelings, or belief system or life and mine. There's just this complete enmeshment there. And so we want to say that, okay, well, what if I made the assumption that, let's just for a minute pretend that 50% of whatever the issue is mine and 50% is theirs. What part doesn't belong to me, right? It's challenging that idea. This is not to say that every situation in life is 50-50. I have seen people come into therapy in couples where it is more one person than the other, but I've never been in the room with two people where there wasn't something going on between the two. And, even if it's the other person isn't setting boundaries, that's still a part that belongs to them. They're not the one being abusive, they're not the one hurting the other person, but they're also taking it. And so that is not to blame the victim, but it means that we have to do something about it if we want it to change, if we're in those relationships. I'm assuming you're both adults. No, I'm not talking about children. So we want to look at the idea that we want to learn to accept the idea, I should say, that other people's emotions are not our responsibility. That we are responsible for how we treat people and how we respond, but not how it makes them feel. So for example, if I set a boundary with you and you don't like it, which is often the case, but it is an important and healthy boundary for me, it is not my responsibility for how that makes you feel. Now, I may have learned that I have to tolerate that and hold your yucky feelings, going back to the whole childhood thing. So we want to challenge that it is not our responsibility. And I say this to patients all the time, and it's true for me too. It's like, especially if you were raised to take care of a parent's emotions in a narcissistic or borderline family or immature or wounded family, it's really hard for us to tolerate other people's negative emotions. We spent our whole life trying to get out of that by taking care of them. So it can feel really difficult to do. But part of this idea is that if I set a boundary and you don't like it, I have to tolerate how it makes you feel without taking it on and saying, oh, it's my fault you feel bad, right? That's the hard thing to do. And so we want to remember that we're allowed to say no, we're allowed to set boundaries, that, in what world is everything and everyone's problem your responsibility? Like, just think about that for a minute. Challenge yourself to look at that dynamic and say, what am I doing? The best example of this I've struggled with is, when your adult children grow up and make decisions that you don't agree with or you're struggling with, my tendency is to always been, well, everything they're doing is my fault. And yeah, there may have been things that they suffered and traumas they endured as a result of my own traumas and things I was struggling with, which didn't allow me to be the parent I wanted to be. But it doesn't mean that everything they do for the rest of their life is my fault. And I've had to spend a lot of time on that in therapy, and I still struggle with it, right? And so when you're so used to taking the blame for everything, it applies to everything and everyone. And it does mean that you take responsibility for the parts that did happen under your watch or at your hands. But at the end of the day, all you can do is say, I'm sorry, I did my best. How can I support you? Where do you need help? But if they don't want to take it or actively self-sabotage, like at some point, where can you go with that? And when you go into it's my fault, you also collapse into the child, and then you can't be the adult parent they need. That's a whole other series of videos. But it's really important. So it does matter. Or same thing with your partner. If you take all the responsibility, then you're not giving them the space to grow and heal and change into the person that you know they can be or they want to be. It's important we all hold our share. And also the next thing is, as a result of this, we often try to control everything. So look at your control issues, how you try to control your own emotions, situations. Many times we've learned that the more we can control things as kids with out of control families, that helped us feel some sense of control and power and survival. But it is a false belief system that you can control everyone and everything and that you'll still be okay. And to understand that you're both in a relationship, let's say, or you're both nice and not nice. That, it doesn't mean that you're a bad person if you're sometimes irritable or angry or say things you regret. Even in your childhood, right, you weren't able to do that, but in your adult life, it's important to honor that. Even if you don't say things out loud, trust me, I know you think negative, yucky things sometimes about people. It is part of being human. It's just what you do with it. That is the issue. And so to honor that, it's okay. You don't have to be the nice, good person all the time. and learn to tolerate your own negative emotions, as I'm saying, and go back to really working on what belongs to you, what doesn't belong to you, and challenging the belief system that everything and everyone is your fault. Where that came from and what to do about it and how to shift your life is the core of this video. It is so important that you understand that even though it was your narrative in childhood, it does not have to be your narrative in your adult life. So that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for being here. Please stay safe and well, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care.